I overheard my daughter-in-law's words at my husband's funeral, and I knew right then that everything I believed about my family was a lie. As the words echoed in my mind, I felt my heart sink. It was a moment that should have been filled with grief, but instead, it was the moment my world shifted. There I was, standing in front of the casket that held my husband's body, trying to hold it together, trying to be strong for everyone else. But the words I had heard came crashing into my thoughts, and I couldn't ignore them any longer. "Speed up the inheritance," she had said. "I'm putting everything into our name right away." It was as if she was talking about some sort of transaction, not the end of a life, not the loss of a husband, but just a business deal. And I was left standing there, feeling as if the earth had shifted beneath my feet. I turned to look at my son, Daniel, standing beside his wife, Rebecca. He looked as lost as I felt, but he didn't see it. He couldn't hear the words that had been spoken just a few feet away. All I could do was keep my composure, nodding politely at the people around me, even as my heart felt like it was breaking into 1,000 pieces. The funeral service carried on, and the quiet murmurs of sympathy around me felt distant, like I wasn't really there. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the loss of Jack, my husband of 45 years, or the realization that my own family had already moved on. They were already thinking about how they could get their hands on what was left of him, on what was supposed to be my legacy. The thought was almost too much to bear, but I couldn't show it. I wouldn't. I had to remain composed, for now. After the service, as the family gathered at the house, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, staring at the photos on the wall. Jack and I had built this life together, this house, this family, but it felt like it was slipping through my fingers, like they were all just waiting for me to disappear. I heard the soft murmur of voices from the kitchen, and then Rebecca appeared in the doorway, smiling that cold smile of hers. "Everything going okay, Martha?" she asked, her tone sweet but empty. I forced a smile. "Yes, everything's fine," I lied. But in my heart, I knew nothing was fine. As the days passed, I began to notice more and more of Rebecca's actions, the little things she did to assert control, the way she tried to undermine me in front of the family. She started talking about selling the house, moving everything to her name, and even suggested that I should consider downsizing. Every time I asked about Jack's will, she brushed me off, like I was asking for something insignificant. I knew something was off, but I couldn't prove it. Not yet. And then, one day, as I was going through some of Jack's papers, I found it. The letter. It was from the lawyer, explaining everything that had been set in motion after Jack's passing. I had never seen this letter before, and it was clear that Rebecca had been making decisions behind my back. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. She had already been planning this. She had been manipulating Daniel for years, and now she was trying to take everything from me. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not after everything Jack and I had built together. I wasn't going to let them push me out of my own life. The days following Jack's funeral were filled with a strange silence that seemed to hang in the air. The house, which had always been filled with life, now felt hollow. I moved around the rooms mechanically, cleaning up, sorting through his belongings, and trying to keep myself busy. But every time I passed the living room, where the family photos hung on the wall, I was reminded of how much had changed. The bright smiles, the shared moments, all of it now felt like a distant memory. I couldn't stop thinking about the words Rebecca had said that day at the funeral. "Speed up the inheritance." The phrase repeated in my mind like an echo, over and over, each time cutting deeper. I never thought it would come to this, my own daughter-in-law plotting to take everything from me. But that was exactly what she was doing. Slowly but surely, she was trying to push me aside, just as I had always feared. Over the next few days, I noticed Rebecca and Daniel acting increasingly distant. They no longer visited as often, and when they did, it was always with an agenda. They spoke in hushed tones when they thought I wasn't listening, and I began to notice subtle signs that made me feel like a stranger in my own home. Rebecca had always been polite, but now there was an underlying tension in her voice that I couldn't ignore. I overheard her talking to Daniel one evening, discussing how to handle the estate, and how it might be better if Mom was taken care of somewhere else. Somewhere else. The words stung like a slap in the face. I had been married to Jack for over 4 decades, and now, Rebecca was suggesting I move out of the house that we had built together, the home where we had raised our children, where we had made countless memories. It was clear now. She was after the house. She wanted to get rid of me, make me a non-issue, so she could take what was mine. The realization hit me hard. I had always been so focused on keeping the peace, on holding the family together, that I never saw what was really happening. My own son, the one I had raised, was slowly becoming someone I didn't recognize. As the days wore on, I became more and more withdrawn. I kept to myself, only speaking when absolutely necessary, and focusing on the small tasks around the house. But every movement felt like it took more effort than the last. The house felt empty without Jack by my side. I found myself sitting at the kitchen table late one night, staring at the papers Jack had left behind, the ones that were now in my hands. There was something about them, something that felt off. I went through them again, one by one, until something caught my eye. It was a document, signed by Jack just a few months before he passed away, that I had never seen before. It was a letter to the lawyer, stating that all of his assets were to be handled by Rebecca and Daniel, but that I was to receive a fair share after their decisions. The words didn't sit right with me. It was as if Jack had left a trail for me to follow, but I hadn't been paying attention. The more I read, the more it became clear. Rebecca had been planning this from the very beginning. She had been working behind the scenes, making decisions without me, all while pretending to be the dutiful daughter-in-law. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. This was not just about money. This was about control. Rebecca and Daniel wanted to take everything from me, and now it was up to me to stop them. I couldn't let this go on any longer. But I wasn't going to confront them right away. No, I would wait. I would be patient, but I would also be strategic. I needed to gather more information, to make sure I had everything I needed before I made my move. And so, I kept quiet, letting the days pass in a blur. Every time I saw Rebecca or Daniel, I kept my face neutral, not letting them see what I had learned. I was no longer the naive woman they thought I was. I had been given a glimpse into their true intentions, and now, I was going to make sure they didn't get away with it. It had been a week since I had discovered the letter. The weight of the words on that document still hung heavy in my mind, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much Rebecca had been plotting. I could feel the sting of betrayal deeper with each passing day. My own son, Daniel, had become just another pawn in her game. He was the one who should have protected me, but instead, he was the one pushing me out. It was hard to accept, hard to comprehend. How had everything gone so wrong? I had always been the one who kept the family together, always been the one to make sure everything ran smoothly. Jack and I had built a life together, a life I thought would last forever. But now, I was being cast aside like I didn't matter. I spent the next few days watching Rebecca more closely. She was careful, calculated, always with a smile on her face, but I could see the way she manipulated every situation. She would speak to Daniel in private, always steering the conversation away from me, making him think that she was doing what was best for the family. But I knew better. I had spent years being the one who knew what was going on in the family. I had seen the signs before, the way people could be convinced to turn on one another for their own benefit. I wasn't going to let Rebecca get away with it. The house felt emptier than ever before, the silence louder, especially when I was alone. I would sit in the living room, staring at the empty spaces, wondering how everything had changed so quickly. There were times when I felt like I had been forgotten, like no one cared. But then I would remember the letter, and I knew that I had to fight back. But I also knew that I couldn't do it the way Rebecca would expect me to. I wasn't going to shout or scream. I wasn't going to beg for their sympathy. No, I had a different plan. The next time Rebecca came over, I watched her with calm eyes. She entered the house with that same confident air, like she owned the place. But I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. I greeted her, just like I always had, with a smile and a warm tone. But inside, I was making plans. I could feel the quiet determination building inside of me. After all, Jack had always said that nothing was more important than family. But now, I saw how fragile those bonds were. I knew that I had to protect myself, and if that meant playing Rebecca's game for a little while, then that's exactly what I would do. I watched her carefully as she spoke to Daniel in hushed tones, discussing their plans without a single thought for me. But I was learning. I was learning how to listen, how to watch for the signs, how to gather the information I needed. And when the time was right, I would make my move. The days turned into weeks, and the tension in the house only grew. Every time I saw Rebecca, I felt the anger building, but I kept it inside, keeping my face neutral. I had become a master of hiding my emotions, of letting everyone think I was just an old woman who didn't understand the world anymore. But in reality, I was biding my time. I was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And finally, it came. One evening, after dinner, Rebecca and Daniel were sitting in the living room, talking about something trivial. I had been in the kitchen, washing the dishes, but I overheard their conversation. Rebecca was talking about how they would finally be able to start fresh once everything was settled, how she had already started making plans for their future. And then, I heard it, the words that made everything clear. "Once we get her out of here, it'll be so much easier," she said, laughing softly. My heart sank, but I didn't let it show. I turned off the water, dried my hands, and walked into the room. They both looked up at me, surprised by my sudden appearance. I smiled at them, but my eyes were cold. "What's easier, Rebecca?" I asked softly. She froze, her smile faltering for a split second before she regained her composure. Daniel looked between us, his face showing confusion. But I knew he was starting to see through the facade, even if he didn't want to admit it. The silence between us was thick, heavy with unspoken words. I didn't need to say anything more. I had just planted the seed. From that moment on, I could see the cracks in Rebecca's armor. She tried to cover it up, tried to pretend that everything was fine, but I could see it in her eyes. She knew that I knew, and it was just a matter of time before I exposed everything. I was no longer the quiet, helpless woman that Rebecca thought I was. No, I was ready to fight back, and I was going to win. I had been waiting for the right moment, and it finally arrived on a quiet Thursday afternoon. The house was still, the kind of silence that comes when everyone is hiding behind their own walls, pretending everything is fine. I had heard enough from Rebecca, seen enough from Daniel, to know that they were planning something big. They thought I didn't understand what was happening, but I did. I wasn't the fool they thought I was. They were taking advantage of my grief, my vulnerability, thinking I wouldn't fight back. But I had learned from years of marriage to Jack, and from raising Daniel. I knew when it was time to stand up for myself. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me any longer. That afternoon, I called Rebecca over to the house. I had already gathered everything I needed, every piece of evidence, every scrap of paper that could expose their plans. I knew it was risky, confronting her alone, but I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to make my move. When she walked through the door, she greeted me with that same cold smile she always wore, the one that hid her true intentions. "Hi, Martha," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. I nodded, but I didn't return the smile. "Sit down, Rebecca," I said calmly, motioning toward the armchair. She hesitated, but eventually, she sat. I could see the tension in her posture, the way her eyes darted around the room. She knew something was about to happen, but she didn't know what. "I've been thinking," I began, my voice steady, "about everything that's been going on lately. About Jack, about the house, about the family." She stiffened, her smile faltering for a brief moment, but she quickly regained control. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone still sweet, but there was an edge to it now. "I know what you've been planning," I said softly, watching her carefully. Her eyes widened, but she quickly masked her shock with a tight smile. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "I'm talking about the will," I said, not bothering to hide the truth any longer. "The way you've been trying to push me out of this house, trying to take everything from me." Rebecca didn't answer right away. She just stared at me, her face frozen in a mask of polite disbelief. She was good at pretending, I'll give her that. But she couldn't hide the truth from me anymore. "You're right," I continued. "I've been watching you, watching the way you've been acting. You think I don't see it, but I do." Her expression shifted slightly, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "I don't know what you're talking about," she repeated, her voice shaking just a little. "Oh, I think you do," I said, leaning in slightly. "You've been working behind my back, trying to take control of everything Jack and I built. But I'm not going to let you do that." I could feel the weight of those words, and I knew I was getting to her. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Rebecca finally broke it, her voice soft but forceful. "You don't understand," she said, her eyes narrowing. "This house is too much for you. You're getting old, Martha. You can't keep up with it." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest. "I don't need your help," I said quietly. "I'm fine, and I'm not going anywhere." Rebecca's face twisted with frustration. She stood up suddenly, pacing across the room. "You're being ridiculous," she snapped. "This isn't about you. This is about what's best for the family." "What's best for the family," I echoed, "is for you to stop trying to take everything for yourself." Rebecca stopped in her tracks, her face going pale. She knew I had her cornered now. "You've been using Daniel to get to me," I said, my voice colder now. "You've been playing him, manipulating him into thinking that this is all for the best. But I know the truth." Rebecca took a step back, her eyes wide with panic. She had underestimated me, thought I wouldn't notice, but I had. And now, she was starting to realize that I wasn't the easy target she thought I was. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice small. "I want what's mine," I said firmly. "I want my life back, and I want you to stop trying to take it from me." For a moment, neither of us said anything. Rebecca stood there, staring at me, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. She was trying to figure out her next move, but I wasn't going to give her that chance. I had already won. I had exposed her, and now, she knew I was no longer someone to be ignored. "I'll fight you," I said quietly, "and I'll win." The next few days were filled with tension, the kind that hangs in the air, thick and suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that Rebecca was still plotting behind my back, trying to take what was rightfully mine. But now, I had a plan of my own, one that didn't involve yelling or confronting her directly. I was going to do this my way with quiet precision. One evening, as the sun set and the house grew dim, I sat at the kitchen table, a stack of papers in front of me. I had been going through Jack's old financial records, looking for any clues, any details that might help me protect myself from Rebecca's schemes. I had never been one to care much for money. Jack had always handled the finances, but now, I needed to understand everything. I needed to know how far Rebecca had gone. As I flipped through the papers, I found the document I had been looking for, a detailed inventory of our assets, including the house, the land, and Jack's investments. But what caught my attention was a small note at the bottom of the page, one that Jack had written himself. It was simple, but it spoke volumes. "Martha, this is all for you. You've earned it." I could almost hear his voice in my mind, and for a moment, I felt a pang of grief. But then, something shifted inside me. I was no longer just grieving. I was fighting back. I had always thought that Jack and I had built everything together, that we were in this for the long haul. And now, I wasn't going to let anyone, especially Rebecca, take it all away. I stood up, feeling a new sense of purpose. I wasn't going to sit idly by anymore. I was going to take action. The next day, I called the lawyer. I needed to get the truth, and I needed it fast. I explained the situation, how I suspected Rebecca was trying to take control of the estate without my consent. The lawyer listened carefully, and after a long pause, he said something that made my heart race. "Martha, I've been waiting for you to call. There's something you need to know." I leaned forward, gripping the phone tightly. "What do you mean?" I asked. Rebecca has already started the process of transferring the property. She's been working with your son to speed up the inheritance, but I've been holding things off. If you want to stop it, we need to act quickly. My mind raced. I had known that Rebecca was moving quickly, but I hadn't realized how far she had gone. I could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on me, but I didn't let it show. I had to stay calm. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady. "Let's stop her." We spent the next few days putting together a strategy. The lawyer filed an injunction to halt the transfer of the property until we could resolve the situation. I knew this would be a battle, and it wasn't going to be easy, but I was determined. Rebecca had underestimated me. She thought I was weak, that I would just roll over and let her take what was mine. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The day of the court hearing came, and I felt a nervous excitement in the pit of my stomach. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. I walked into the courtroom, head held high, my heart pounding. Rebecca and Daniel were sitting across from me, their faces tight with frustration. I could see the tension between them, and I knew they weren't prepared for what was coming. The lawyer made his argument, presenting the evidence that Rebecca had been acting without my consent. Rebecca tried to defend herself, but I could see her confidence slipping. She wasn't the smooth talker she thought she was. She was caught, and there was no way out. As the judge deliberated, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. I wasn't just defending my rights. I was taking back control of my life. I had fought for this, and I was going to win. After what felt like an eternity, the judge returned with his ruling. The transfer of assets is hereby suspended, he declared. We will reconvene to discuss the division of the estate. Rebecca's face drained of color. She had lost, and I had won. As we left the courtroom, Rebecca shot me a look of pure hatred, but I didn't care. I had done what I set out to do. I had protected what was mine. And now, I could finally breathe. But this was just the beginning. The fight wasn't over. I still had to make sure that everything was settled fairly, that Rebecca couldn't manipulate the situation anymore. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was in control. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one calling the shots. It had been a few weeks since the court hearing, and while Rebecca and Daniel had been temporarily thwarted, I knew the battle wasn't over. I spent my days taking inventory of the house, carefully making sure that everything was in place, not just physically, but legally as well. I wasn't about to let anyone take what was mine, no matter how hard they tried. The tension between us, though, was palpable. Every time Rebecca came over, there was a certain coldness in her voice, a silent animosity that lingered in the air. She had become more cautious, more guarded, but I knew she was plotting her next move. I wasn't foolish enough to think this was over, but I also knew she was starting to feel the pressure. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power, control, and who would get to decide what happened to the life Jack and I had built together. I spent one evening sitting in the living room, the place where so many memories had been made with Jack. The house was quiet, the air heavy with the silence of loss, but there was a fire within me now. I wasn't just going to roll over and let Rebecca take everything away from me. I wasn't a passive victim. I was a fighter, and I would not allow her to walk all over me any longer. That night, I called Daniel. I knew he wasn't happy with the way things had been going, and I could hear the unease in his voice when he answered. He had been distant for a while, but I wasn't about to let that keep me from confronting him. I needed to talk to him, to make him understand what was really happening. We need to talk, I said when he picked up. There was a pause before he replied. What about Mom? I could tell he wasn't thrilled to be having this conversation, but I wasn't going to let him avoid it. About Rebecca, about everything, I said firmly. I know what's been going on behind my back. What do you mean? Daniel asked, his voice tight. I'm not blind, I said, my voice calm but firm. I see what Rebecca has been doing, and I know you've been complicit in it. You've been helping her, making decisions without me. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Mom, Daniel finally said, his voice softening. You don't understand. Rebecca is just trying to help. She thinks it's better if we move things along quickly. Help, I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. She's trying to push me out of my own home, Daniel. That's not help. That's manipulation. I can't believe you're going along with it. It's not like that, Daniel protested, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. I didn't want any of this to happen, Mom. But Rebecca, she's been handling everything. She's been making all the decisions, and I just wanted to make sure everything was taken care of. I took a deep breath, letting the words sink in. I could feel the anger rising inside of me, but I kept it in check. This isn't how we do things, I said quietly. You don't get to decide everything behind my back, and you don't get to let Rebecca take control of what's mine. I built this family with Jack. This is my life, Daniel. And if you don't stand up to her, then I will. There was another long pause. I could hear Daniel breathing, as if he were processing what I'd said. Finally, he spoke. I don't want to lose you, Mom, he said, his voice small. I don't know what to do. You need to stop letting her control everything, I said firmly. You need to stop hiding behind Rebecca and start standing up for what's right. There was a shift in his voice, something that made me believe he was finally starting to understand. I'll talk to her, he said quietly. I'll make sure she knows what's going on. I'll make it right. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but I knew it wasn't over. I wasn't going to let Rebecca get away with everything, and neither was Daniel. The next few days were tense. I could feel the unease in the house as Rebecca started to realize that things were slipping away from her. I wasn't just standing by anymore. I was fighting for what was mine, and I wasn't going to let her win. Daniel kept his word. He had a conversation with Rebecca, and I could tell by the way things shifted that she was no longer as confident as she had been before. She still tried to push her agenda, but now, there was a clear line in the sand. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me, and I wasn't going to let Daniel be manipulated any longer. I wasn't going to lose this fight. As the days passed, the tension in the house began to settle, but it wasn't over. I could feel Rebecca trying to regain her footing, her efforts to subtly undermine me still present. But now there was a shift in the way things were handled. Daniel had stepped up, and I could tell he was beginning to see the truth about Rebecca. She wasn't as subtle as she thought, and now, her actions were being met with resistance. I wasn't going to let my guard down. The house felt less like a home and more like a battleground. Every conversation, every small interaction felt loaded. I knew Rebecca was still scheming, trying to find a way to get around what had been set in motion. But she was beginning to realize that I wasn't backing down. One evening, I was sitting in the living room, organizing some of Jack's old files when Daniel came in, looking tired but determined. He sat down beside me, and I could feel the weight of the conversation we were about to have. "I talked to her," he said quietly. I didn't need to ask who he was talking about. "She didn't take it well," he continued. "She's angry, but I think she's starting to understand that I'm not going to let her just take over everything." I nodded, watching him carefully. "You did the right thing," I said, though my voice was calm. There was a sense of finality in it. "I know it's not easy, but it's necessary." He looked at me, a conflicted expression crossing his face. "I don't know how this is going to play out, Mom," he admitted. Rebecca isn't going to give up easily. She doesn't like being told no. Then we'll just have to make sure she knows that no means no," I said, my voice steady. There was no other choice. I had made it clear where I stood, and I wasn't about to let her walk all over me again. "She's not going to get away with this," I added. The following days felt like a chess game. Rebecca was trying her best to play it cool, but every move she made was being met with counteraction. I could see her growing more desperate, trying to hold on to the control she had tried to establish. But now, I was in charge. I had the support I needed, and I wasn't going to let her twist things in her favor anymore. It was clear now that Rebecca had underestimated me, just like she had underestimated Daniel. Her once strong confidence was slipping, and I could see it in her every move. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing that I was aware of how much she had lost control. I had to remain calm. The last thing I needed was for her to think I was rattled. I started making small but significant changes around the house. Nothing major, just enough to let her know that things were changing. I reconnected with some of the people who Rebecca had tried to shut out, the ones who had always been part of Jack's life, the ones who mattered. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming what was mine. One afternoon, Rebecca came over unexpectedly. She stood in the doorway, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning the room like she was trying to figure out what I had done. "I thought we had an understanding," she said, her tone tight. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her, letting the silence stretch between us. Finally, I spoke. "We do," I said calmly. "But you need to understand that things are different now. I'm not going to let you take control of my life, of what's mine." Her face flushed with anger, but she didn't say anything. She just stood there, her lips pressed together, staring at me. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, but there was nothing she could do now. The balance had shifted, and she knew it. "This isn't over," she said quietly, before turning and walking out the door. I stood there for a moment, listening to her footsteps retreat. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had made my stand, and I wasn't backing down. The battle for control over my life was far from over, but I had already won the most important part. I had taken back my voice. The rest would come in time. The weeks that followed felt like a slow march toward an inevitable confrontation. I knew that Rebecca had not given up, but there was something different in the air now. The way she looked at me had changed, the subtle hostility in her gaze replaced with something more calculated, more careful. She knew, just as I did, that the balance had shifted. It wasn't about money anymore, or the house, or the inheritance. It was about power, control, and who would decide the fate of everything Jack and I had built. And it was clear now that Rebecca was no longer in the driver's seat. I could feel her tension every time she came over. The way she would hesitate at the door, her eyes flicking nervously around the room. It was as if she was trying to figure out what had changed, but she couldn't see it. She couldn't understand that the game had already shifted. Daniel was still torn. I could tell. He loved Rebecca, but he had also seen the truth. He knew, deep down, that I had been right all along. But there were still moments when I could feel him pull back, like he wasn't sure where he stood. And that was the hardest part, watching him struggle. It wasn't just Rebecca I had to fight against anymore. It was also the pull of his loyalty, torn between his wife and his mother. He didn't want to lose me, but he also didn't want to lose Rebecca. The tension between us, however, was growing clearer with each passing day. One night, after dinner, I sat alone in the kitchen, looking out at the backyard. The world outside felt so still, and yet inside, everything was in motion. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks, and now I knew it was time to put my plan into action. The quiet was broken by the sound of footsteps. I turned to see Rebecca standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She hesitated before speaking. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice steady but low. I nodded, motioning for her to sit at the table. She walked over slowly, sitting across from me. I watched her closely, not saying a word. She looked like she was trying to decide what to say, the words clearly weighing on her. Finally, she spoke. "I don't think you understand," she said quietly, her eyes not meeting mine. "I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to make sure everything is handled, that everything is taken care of." I couldn't help but let out a small laugh. "Help," I said, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "You've been trying to take everything from me, Rebecca. Don't try to pretend that this is about helping. You've been manipulating Daniel, trying to get him to make decisions without me. And now, you're trying to manipulate me into thinking that I should just sit back and let you have it all." She looked up at me then, her eyes flashing with frustration. "You don't get it," she said, her voice rising. "This house, this property, it's too much for you. You're getting old, Martha. You can't keep up with it all. I'm just trying to make things easier for everyone." The words stung, but I didn't let them show. Instead, I stood up, walking over to the window. I could feel Rebecca's eyes on me, but I didn't look back. "This house isn't just bricks and mortar," I said quietly, my voice steady. "This is where Jack and I built our life together. This is where I raised my children, where we shared our dreams, our memories. You can't just take that away." I turned to face her, my eyes meeting hers. "You're not going to take it from me, Rebecca. Not without a fight." For a moment, there was silence. Then Rebecca stood up, her face flushed with anger. She took a step toward me, but I didn't move. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice cold. "You don't know what's coming." I met her gaze, unwavering. "I know exactly what's coming," I said quietly. "And I'm ready." She paused for a moment, as if weighing her options. Then, without another word, she turned and left the room. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of what had just happened. It was clear now. Rebecca had tried to push me out, to take control, but she had underestimated me. The game had changed, and I was no longer the one in the background. No, now I was at the center of it all, and I wasn't backing down. As the days passed, I could feel the shift in the house. Rebecca was still trying to manipulate Daniel, still trying to get what she wanted, but I could see it in him. He was beginning to realize the truth. It wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about respect, about loyalty, about family. And in the end, Rebecca would learn that those things couldn't be bought. I wasn't just defending my home anymore. I was defending my life, my legacy, and I would fight for it until the very end.